And as like a 7 or 8-year-old, you guys, my parents, I was like, oh my God, go sign my book. And my parents were like, you're not very bright because you saw her do that with her hand. Shut up, it was working through her. You don't even know. So from that moment on, like that was like a really transformative experience for me, not only because it goes totally from my book and my parents are wrong, but also because, one, it introduced me to a writer who was just a lady from Alabama. I was a girl from Alabama. She was, I could grow up to be a lady from Alabama. And here she had written books. And also, it sort of indoctrinated me into a lifelong love of books that deal with the supernatural. I love anything spooky. And I always have, even though I don't think I slept in my own bed until I was like 12 because I loved spooky things too much. And then I would like crawl and like sleep at the foot of my parents' bed. So that's sort of, I think it's interesting to me that, like, I never really thought about being a writer for a very long time. I majored in English in college, but it wasn't so much because I wanted to be a writer as it was, I was actually originally a criminology major because I was going to be a lawyer, and then I discovered that I had to take statistics, and statistics is a fancy word for math. So that's right, I changed my entire life because I was like, math, peace out. So I decided to go to the English department because I'd enjoyed my sort of intro English classes, and because I really liked reading books and talking about books and writing about books, and so it seemed like the English program was probably the place that I needed to be. So I graduated. I don't even have, like, my degree wasn't in writing or creative writing. It's actually a super useful degree. I have a BA in English literature, and my concentration was in 19th century British literature and gender roles. So useful, you guys. Like, let me tell you, so many jobs out there for people who can tell you, like, what a phallic symbol in some book is. That, I'm your girl. Like, do you need me to tell you about how The Secret Garden is really about men trying to suppress women? I'm here for it. But when I got out of school, and when I was done with college, I got married, and my husband was a high school science teacher. And I saw him teaching high school and, like, changing lives and being so influential with kids, and I was like, oh, wow, I also want summers off. So I decided to be a high school teacher. And I taught high school English for 4 years. I really, really liked it, and also really, really hated it. I loved my kids. I loved books. Like right now, if you guys want to go out in the parking lot later and let me teach you the Canterbury Tales, like we can do that. I can make that happen. I really enjoyed that part of it. I didn't really like teaching in, like, state bureaucracy and public education in our country. It's kind of messed up and all that. So I knew that I was kind of on the right path because I was like, yes, books and kids. This feels right. This grading essays and accountability and testing, that feels less right. And so I quit. I just sort of quit my job up in the middle of the year, and I wish I'd quit really dramatically. I wish I'd, like, ripped down posters off the wall and been like, deuces, and, like, I don't know, kicked lockers, but I just handed in my letter of resignation, like, my grammatically correct, nicely typed. And it was when I did that I was like, that's it, I'm going to write a book. And I always like to tell this story because, A, I completely accept that my path to publication was insane and that I'm incredibly lucky to have this job. But I sort of like people to know that I really feel like it's important that if you're really unhappy in your life, which I was very unhappy in my job, like it was like all like gray. I was 20-something then, but I looked 30-something. And it just wasn't working out for me, and it was not worth it. Life is too short to stay in something that makes you that unhappy. So I'm just throwing that out there. Sometimes you make a big jump and the universe is like, cool, I got a net, we're good. And that's luckily what happened for me. I sat down to write a book, and I also have to say this part too. My husband cashed out his state retirement and gave that money to me so that I could sit home and write a book while he went and got another job. So big ups to my husband, because he's always like, do you tell people that part? That's an important part. That's a very important part. So anyway, I stayed home for 4 months and I wrote the book that became Hex Hall. And when I wrote Hex Hall, I knew that I wanted to write about boarding schools because, you know how there's like a lot of boarding schools and teenager books? I'm going to give you guys the reason for this. It's because we don't want to write about your parents. Like, that's it. Like, think about it. Like, I'm a mom. My son is 7. I won't let him ride his bike to the end of the street. He certainly can't, like, battle the dark lord of evil or whatever happens in, like, YA books, you know? So we gotta get rid of your parents, because they're just gonna get in the way. They'll be like, no, you can't go do that thing. And you're like, ah. which we'll talk about in a minute when I get with School Spirits, because I couldn't do a boarding school book again. I'd already done one. So anyway, I wanted to do boarding schools. I wanted kind of Southern Gothic. I wanted magic and monsters, and I wanted it to be funny. Because when I was teaching high school, my kids were reading a lot of YA, and I read a lot of really good stuff, don't get me wrong, but I was also really struck by how very serious everything was so dire. And the love stories were always like, I saw you across the room, and I have no idea why, but now I will die for you. You know, I was just like, everybody's like 16, like maybe just like make out a little bit first, like shut up. Easy there, dude. This is like a joke that I have with one of my friends too about how no offense to Twilight, but like, man, wouldn't having ever come as your boyfriend be like really exhausting? Like after a while, would you just be like, no, it's totally safe for me to go to the grocery store, or like just be like, don't use the Comet Billy, it'll rub off on your hand. I'll get gloves, it'll be fine. Anyway, so I wanted to write something a little bit lighter, a little bit funnier, and something that sort of reflected. I wanted like the real kids that I had been teaching in high school, but in a very unreal setting. So the idea of Hex Hall was sort of, what if you got sent to reform school for monsters? My main character is a 16-year-old witch, or at least she thinks she's a witch, and she does a love spell that goes very badly wrong, and she ends up in, again, like I said, sort of juvie for monsters. I always like to joke that the idea behind the book is like, what if you got sent to Hogwarts, but it sucked? And my publisher is like, please stop saying that. J.K. Rowling is going to sue us. She's going to come for all $5 of your dollars. So anyway, but that's kind of what I was thinking, and I had so much fun writing that series. And so when it came time to write the new book, which this actually belongs to someone else, but I wrote it, so it's cool. This book, School Spirits, which, can I just say, I have to talk about the title for a second. I'm the worst at titling my books, you guys. The only title I have ever come up with is for a book that I have coming out next year called Rebel Belle. And it's Belle, like B-E-L-L-E. That's it. I can't come up with titles to save my life. I've just stopped trying. This is a book about a haunted high school. Why could I not come up with School Spirits? I mean, why did some assistant at my publisher have to be like, what about School Spirits? Yeah, duh, I'm an idiot. So anyway, this book had no name. It was the Izzy book for the longest time. But anyway, this book deals with Isolde Brannick, also called Izzy, who is the cousin of my main character from the Hex Hall series. This is a very different kind of setting, because with the Hex Hall series, I was dealing with a girl who had powers, who was sent to a school for creatures with similar magical powers. Izzy Brannick is a monster hunter, and her family has been monster hunters for years, but now there's only 3 of them left. Izzy, her sister Finley, and their mom Ashlyn, and they are sort of the last standing Brannicks. In this book, Izzy has to deal with going to high school for the very first time, because she's sort of been like homeschooled and been an Amazon woman. Her family has like a compound in Tennessee. So she has to go to like a regular high school, and I had so much fun sort of writing that. The idea of, it really sort of flipped the idea on its head to me of like, what would that be like if you'd never been to regular high school, and so how do you even prepare? So in this book, Izzy prepares by watching a very terrible Gossip Girl-esque TV show called Ivy Springs, that actually, like, my editor had to keep telling me, like, Rachel, I know that you think the Ivy Springs joke is very funny, but, like, you've got to stop making references to it constantly. So I was constantly having her be like, and then on Ivy Springs, somebody escaped in a hot air balloon. Like, I just loved, like, the crazier I could get with it. So anyway, Izzy has to deal with going to a regular high school and making friends kind of for the first time in her life. Again, her family's been very isolated because of what they do. And also dealing with sort of a romance situation with a boy who is not like anything that she had ever expected to deal with. His name is Dex, and he is something, as you will see. So I'm very, very pleased with this book. It makes me happy. It's a little bit lighter than the series, I think. It's a little bit. It's maybe not as... Izzy is a much quieter character than Sophie, which was an interesting thing to write, because I was so used to Sophie, my main character in the Hex Hall series, who makes all these like one-liners, and Izzy is so like, no, I don't know how to make one-liners. So that was like a really different experience. Like getting into her head was such an interesting thing for me. So that's, the people around her were maybe a little bit more flamboyant than she is. So this book, I was trying to think too. This probably is one of the fastest books that I've ever written. I think I wrote like the first draft in about 3 months. because it was just so much fun. And I kept throwing in more jokes about the Gossip Girl TV show, so it just kept getting longer. But yeah, so this is it, and you guys get to buy it a whole day early because it technically doesn't come out until tomorrow, but hey, I'm here. So anyway, that is a little bit about me. That is a little bit about the book. And if you guys have any specific questions about writing or books or whatever, my hair this way, whatever, like, I'm here for you. Oh, there it is. I love my water. That's right. It's right in front of me. Yes.
Kudos to your husband.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
I'll tell him you said so, yeah.
Was Hex Hall the first book you had ever written? I know it's the first book that you had published.
Yeah, Hex Hall was the first book that I've ever written. I should say it was the first book I ever finished. I was excellent at starting books. Oh my gosh, you guys get so the crap out of a book. So good at starting books. I was less good at finishing them. And this is actually, I think, like a good bit of writer advice. I used to think that when a book got hard or when I didn't want to work on it anymore, that it was because the book was bad. It was because I could do better. There was another idea that would be more fun. That is not really the case. I've written 7 books now, and all 7 at about 25 to 30,000 words in. I'm like, this is hard. I don't know. That is the nature of making books. And once I figured that out, once I made myself finish Hex, and I saw, and then I finished another one and went, oh wow, I hated that book in the middle too. That's just sort of how it goes. But yeah, it was the very first book that I finished. I think too, though, it's significant. It was the first YA I'd ever attempted to write. I was going to write like romance novels. Or like urban fantasy, you know, like those books with chicks with like tight jeans and like a tattoo and a gun and a cool knife. I was going to write those. Although I like to say that this comes like the closest I've ever come, because you can see that she's got a cool weapon and her jeans are relatively tight, so I think they're jeggings, but you know. I have jokingly called this book Baby's First Urban Fantasy, because it's kind of got a lot of that element too. But yeah, but I feel like when I found YA, I was like, oh yes, this is what I'm supposed to be writing, and so it was a little bit easier for that.
I want to be a book publisher maybe one day. Do you have anything you like in publishers or any advice?
Oh gosh, I have so much I like about publishing. Like, there's so many different aspects of publishing, which I think is really cool. I love that there are so many jobs, and I don't know how like editors' brains work, because like my editor, you know, she bought this book. You know, she's like, I like this idea, and yes, you may write this book, and we will make it a book. And then, you know, she takes what I give her, like this rough draft, and helps me turn it into an actual book. You know, says things like, well, this doesn't work, and can we have more of this here, and what if we lopped off these 50 pages and made new 50 pages, things like that. I think the biggest advice, anyone who wants to get into publishing, there's so much cool information online these days. There's so many, like, find like editors and agents and people like that to follow on Twitter, or there's a lot of like Tumblrs and things like that now set up for it. I think that's really, really helpful, so you sort of get you know, a closer look at what they actually do. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there. Yes.
What was one of your biggest fears when you first got published?
One of my biggest fears, obviously there's the like,
yeah.
Luckily, when my very first book came out, I was also on book tour. Now this is my 4th book tour, so like, I'm sort of in my groove now. My first book tour, I was like, wow, this is a lot of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and running all over cities. And I literally was so tired the day that my book came out that like someone could have called me and been like, wow, it sold 0 copies on its first day. And I would have been like, okay, I don't know, I can't feel feelings anymore, I'm too sleepy. I cannot sleep. So yeah, there's always that. There's that people just won't find the audience that you wanted to, that maybe somehow everyone was wrong and this is not something that should have been published. And that the thing is, that never ever stops. Because this is my 4th book coming out, and I still have that like, oh, I hope people like it. It's probably not good. Which again, I think is something that especially aspiring writers sometimes feel like, oh, I'm terrible. I'm not good. I can't do this. And every professional writer I know, I just spent 2 weeks in Scotland with a writer friend, and we were both working on like new projects. And at one point during the day, like we were both like laying face down in our respective bedrooms, like it's too hard, I'm terrible. And she's got like 9 books coming out. I have like 7. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like everybody, I'm afraid that self-loathing is a very important part of writer DNA.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are the fears you never get rid of for some reason. Yeah.
Oh, me. Okay. Well, you have like, you said you use like inside jokes and things like that when you're writing. Do you ever feel like it's helping your book and like giving more flavor and setting it apart, or do you feel like, oh, I should pull it back because maybe no one understands?
It's a tricky thing, and I will always like I said, I will throw in too many jokes, and that's where my editor is there to be like, okay, Rachel, like, it's funny once, like, it's not as funny as you seem to think it is. So yeah, I mean, I do think like those little bits. I think that when I was first going through the book, it didn't have those little bits of like her watching teen TV, trying to sort of get an idea of what regular high school's like. I think that throwing that in, not only did it give me a chance for a little bit more humor, since my main character was not a particularly humorous person by nature, that gave me a chance to add in a little bit of that. But it also, I felt like, said something about her, and how she would approach this is not just to like throw herself into high school. It's like, well, first time, because she's a monster hunter, so she's like, well, I have to do my research like I always do. Only now it's not like, vampires I'm dealing with, but regular teenage kids. So yeah, I think that those things can help. It's just, it's knowing when.
Yeah, so people understand it.
I got another question.
Yeah, see, like the first thing that sprung to my mind had a bad word in it, so I'm going to... It was calm the heck down, to put it that way. It will all be okay. I stressed a lot, especially because, like, publishing, I've always said, the business itself is engineered to make you a crazy person, and since writers are already crazy people, it just exacerbates it. So, like, for example, Hex Hall was acquired by my publishing house, Hyperion. They were like, yes, we will buy this and we will make it a book. We will make it 3 books. In April of 2008, the first book came out in March 2010. So that's nearly 2 years to go completely insane and spin your wheels and think, like, what's going to happen? And the thing is, it was all fine. And, like, so I wish that I could sort of go back and be like, shh, something like pet pre-publisher. Like, it's going to be okay. Just relax and, and get through it. And going, like, even further back to, like, I don't know, I think that, like, I wouldn't change anything, though, that's for sure. Like, even as hard as, like, teaching was, and I also have, like, all this bitterness because I went to grad school, and then I have, like, red tape in grad school, so I don't have a master's, even though I have, like, 45 hours of school, all this money, but I have no master's. And every once in a while, I still have, like, my, like, master's moment, and my husband always reminds me, he's like, but if you hadn't gone through it, if that hadn't happened, then you wouldn't be where you are. So, it's, so I try not to stress about this kind of things too much.
How do you approach handling negative reviews? Because I know sometimes there's drama between authors and reviewers.
Yeah, my thought on that, and again, this comes back to a high school teacher really comes in handy. If somebody, like, slams my book on Goodreads, that's cool. Someone might threaten to stab me, like, at my actual job.
Okay, so that's not
Did a kid threaten to stab me? Oh, no, someone just said that my book was crap? Okay. It's fine. No, I think that, once the book is out there, it belongs to other people. That sounds like the people. Like, but it belongs to other people now. It's not mine anymore, and people are going to reflect on it and do what they need to do with it, and that's totally valid and fine. I think that it's easy to get your feelings hurt. Obviously, it doesn't feel good when you see a bad review, but the other thing is, too, you kind of have to review that stuff. You can, turn off Google alerts. I do think it's obnoxious, like, when every once in a while, like, when somebody will, like, at you on Twitter a bad review of your book, you're like, hey, I didn't need to see that, thanks, though. That doesn't happen very often, though. But I think, yeah, just let it go, and any time that we sort of do things like, this person was mean about my book, and so now if they ever become a writer, I will smash them, which, A, could never, ever happen. I was like, there was a thing that kind of sprung up about that, about how, like, oh, if you're a reviewer and you review a book poorly and then you become a writer, that writer will, like, that you slammed previously will rise from the ashes to crush your recipient publishing career. And I was like, oh my God, if I called my editor and was like, This person was mean to me online, so whenever I published their book, she would be like, "You are a crazy person." But yeah, I think anytime that we get kind of about that kind of thing, we're suppressing discourse about books, and that's not cool. Like, let reviewers do their thing, let authors do their thing. If you're ever feeling bad about bad reviews, go to like Amazon and look up, or Goodreads and look up To Kill a Mockingbird, which has like thousands of one-star reviews. Taste is a thing, so yeah, I say just let it go. Everybody be cool. Oh man, there are so many. I'm really fascinated by co-writing because I don't know how they do it, because we're all such control freaks. So I have no idea how they can make it happen. Because I would be like, oh my god, you screwed up everything cool that I did. But I also think maybe it would be fun to be like, I don't know, this is hard now to do it. It's such a good question. I love Live a Bray stuff, so maybe Live a Bray. Live a Bray would probably be like, who the heck is Rachel?
No.
You mean you respect each
so yeah, probably. And then I have friends, too. That's my gut instinct is to go with some of my closer writer friends, Lindsay Levitt, Victoria Schwab, people like that, just because we're buddies, and I think that would be fun. Or it could totally end our relationship. It's really one or the other. So yeah, I think that. But I'm so in awe of co-writers, and I know Andrea Kramer and David Levitt, they're staring at me. So are going to be here tomorrow, and they do that. So that's pretty cool.
Would you ever do it if you were asked?
Yeah, I think so, depending on the person. There are some people that I'm like, oh, clearly our styles would not match up. But yeah, I think it would be. I'm sort of open to trying anything publishing-wise. Just to see.
Would you ever write a book from a male perspective?
I'm actually writing one right now. I'm writing a middle grade book, and it's 3 POVs, and they're all in third person, which was different for me because I usually write first person, and one of them is a boy. And that's the book that made me lay down in Scotland and go, I can't, because the boy perspective, he's like a 12-year-old boy in 1914 Scotland, and sort of trying to get his voice. And then I also had these 21st century girls that I was dealing with. So, but yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I prefer to write for girl, or I prefer to write female protagonists. It's just where I feel most comfortable. But again, I like to try to stretch my writing muscle a little bit, try something new. Yes.
Now that you're a published author, has that changed the way you read other people's books?
It has. That's a good question. It has. This is the sad truth about authordom. It kind of ruins reading a little bit. Just because anytime something's really good, I'm sort of looking at it and going, how did you do that? There are also times when I feel like I can see what the author was doing. I can see. I read a book a couple of years ago, and I won't obviously name it. But when I was reading it, I was like, oh, you wrote yourself into a hole. Look, I can see exactly where it went wrong, and all of this stuff is you trying to get out of the hole that you dug, and you didn't know whether you was. I could just tell that that's what had happened. And that's why a lot of the time, too, I try now, I don't read a huge amount of YA anymore, which I've just found is better for me. If I can read something that's so far outside of what I'm writing, I don't have a tendency to do that as much. So I read a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery novels these days, and that kind of helps. So, but yeah, it does. It ruins it a little bit. It's like you've seen the man behind the curtain. It's very distressing. Cool. I will sign some stuff for you guys now if you would like me to. I have this cool thing up here. I think it's fine. Sounds good. Get started. So I'm going to go ahead.
Great. We've got all of Rachel's books up for sale. We haven't got all the Hex series. She'll sign them. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.